On a quiet Christmas morning, Emma, a kind-hearted young woman, noticed an elderly man sitting alone in sadness. She wanted to cheer him up, so she bought him some small gifts and treats. To her, it was just a simple act of kindness. But an hour later, her peaceful day was interrupted by a knock at the door. When she opened it, she was surprised to see a group of lawyers standing outside. Their unexpected visit had something to do with the kindness she had shown, and it was about to change her Christmas in a way she never imagined. Hi everyone, welcome back to Unveiled Narratives. Today, I have another heartfelt story to share with you. That morning, Emma was at church, kneeling in a quiet corner. She whispered a silent prayer, asking for kindness and peace to spread in the world. She also prayed for strength to handle her daily struggles. After finishing her prayer, she stood up, adjusted her coat, and smiled softly. She was excited for the day ahead. This Christmas was special to Emma. She had saved up just enough money to treat herself to a meal at her favorite Italian restaurant, a little luxury she hadn't enjoyed in months. To most people, it might not seem like much, but to her, it was a big deal. She had made small sacrifices, like skipping coffee and snacks, just to afford this one meal. Now, the thought of finally having her favorite pasta filled her with joy. As she walked toward the church's exit, she suddenly slowed her steps. In a quiet corner, away from the crowd, she saw an elderly man sitting alone on a bench. At first, she thought he was just resting, but as she got closer, she noticed his slumped shoulders and the quiet tears falling onto the floor. Emma's heart sank. Her excitement faded as concern took over. Something was clearly wrong. She hesitated for a moment, unsure if she should approach him. Then, gathering her courage, she stepped forward. "Excuse me, sir. Are you okay?" she asked gently, careful not to startle him. The elderly man looked up, surprised by her presence. He quickly wiped his tears, trying to hide his sadness. For a moment, he said nothing, his lips pressed into a thin line. Then, in a weak voice, he finally spoke. "It's nothing really. Just memories," he said, forcing a small smile that couldn't quite hide his pain. Emma sat down beside him, leaving enough space so he wouldn't feel uncomfortable. "Sometimes talking about things can help," she said softly. "I'm here if you want to share." The man hesitated but then gave a small nod. "I was hoping to spend Christmas with my family," he admitted. "I went to see my son and meet my grandson, but they turned me away. They said they had other plans." His voice trembled, and he took a deep breath before continuing. "I was so excited to see them, to be part of their lives again, even just for a day. But they didn't want me there." Emma's heart ached for him. "I'm so sorry," she said sincerely. "No one should feel this way, especially today." The man wiped his eyes and gave a weak nod. Emma sat beside him in silence for a moment, thinking. Then she glanced down at her purse, as if making a decision. She had been looking forward to her special meal, but suddenly, it didn't seem so important anymore. This man needed kindness and company more than she needed that meal. And she wasn't about to let him spend Christmas alone. Standing up, she smiled at him gently. "Wait here. I'll be right back," she said softly. The elderly man nodded, though his expression was unsure. As he watched her walk away, his shoulders slumped again. A quiet sadness crept back over him. For a moment, he thought she might not return, that he would be left alone again. But Emma had no intention of leaving him behind. Emma stepped into a nearby shop, determined to bring a little joy to the elderly man. She carefully picked out a warm cup of coffee and a fresh pastry, hoping it would bring him some comfort. As she walked toward the counter to pay, something caught her eye: a Christmas card. It was simple but beautiful, with bright, festive colors. She picked it up and, after a moment of thought, wrote a short message inside. She wanted him to know he wasn't alone, that someone cared. At the register, Emma counted her money and realized that what she had saved for her special meal was now being spent on these small gifts. But she didn't hesitate. She remembered the prayer she had whispered in the church and knew in her heart that making the elderly man smile was more important than any meal she could have. After paying the $50 bill, Emma stepped out of the shop and walked back toward the church, clutching the small bag of items tightly. She hoped they would brighten the man's Christmas, even just a little. As she neared the bench, she saw him still sitting there, his head lowered in thought. Before approaching, she cleared her throat gently, then extended the warm cup of coffee toward him. "Here," she said softly. "This is for you." The man looked up, his tired eyes widening in surprise. He stared at the cup in disbelief. "You came back," he whispered, his voice unsteady. He hesitated, then, with trembling hands, took the cup. "Thank you. Thank you so much." Emma placed the pastry and the Christmas card beside him. "I thought these might make your day a little better," she said warmly. The man's gaze lingered on the card. Carefully, he picked it up and opened it. As he read the short message inside, his lips trembled, and he blinked rapidly, trying to hold back tears. "You didn't have to do this," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "It's been so long since someone showed me kindness." Emma sat beside him again, keeping a respectful distance. "I just wanted to help," she said softly. "It's Christmas, and no one should feel alone today." The man exhaled deeply, his hands wrapped around the warm cup. After a moment, he spoke again, his voice filled with quiet sadness. "I just wanted to feel like part of a family again," he admitted. "Even if just for a little while." Emma's heart ached for him. After a brief pause, she said, "You don't have to be alone tonight. Why not come to my place? I'd love the company." The man looked at her, surprised. "You've already done so much." "I don't want to impose," he said softly. "You're not imposing," Emma replied firmly. "Please, it would mean a lot to me too. Christmas is better when it's shared." He stared at her for a moment, his eyes glistening. Finally, he gave a small nod. A short while later, as they arrived at Emma's small apartment, she held the door open with a warm smile. The space was simple but inviting, filled with a quiet charm. Though the furniture was mismatched and a little worn, a couch with frayed edges, a coffee table with faint scuff marks, everything was neat and clean. It was clear that Emma took great care in making her home as cozy as possible, despite her struggles. In the corner stood a small Christmas tree, decorated with a few old ornaments. A single string of lights blinked unevenly, casting a soft glow. The elderly man paused near the tree, his gaze lingering on it. One of the lights had slipped from a branch, hanging loosely. He reached out and gently adjusted it, tucking it back into place. The tree looked just a little brighter now, and for the first time that day, a faint smile crossed his face. Emma noticed him by the tree and smiled. She gestured toward the couch. "Make yourself comfortable. I'll get us something to eat. It won't take long." The elderly man nodded and sat down in a worn but comfortable armchair near the tree. As Emma disappeared into the small kitchen, humming softly as she worked, he let his eyes wander around the room. On a small side table, he noticed a stack of papers. He hesitated, then picked one up. His heart sank. It was a utility bill, stamped with the words, "Past due," in bold red letters. Beneath it were more envelopes, each carrying similar notices. In the corners, Emma had scribbled the amounts she owed in pen. His hands trembled slightly as he set the bills back down. His gaze drifted toward the kitchen, where Emma was still humming, focused on preparing their meal. She moved carefully, dividing small portions of ingredients into containers before setting aside just enough for the two of them. Every bit of food was accounted for. The elderly man leaned back in the chair, his thoughts heavy. This young woman, who was clearly struggling, who had so little, had not hesitated to help him. She had spent her own money to bring him a meal and welcomed him into her home, asking for nothing in return. His heart ached, filled with both gratitude and admiration. When Emma returned with 2 steaming bowls of tomato soup and 2 small plates of sweet potato casserole, she handed him a bowl with a warm smile. "Here we go," she said cheerfully. "It's not fancy, but it's warm and filling. And a little festive." The elderly man accepted the bowl, his hands trembling slightly. His eyes flickered toward the golden brown topping on the casserole. "You've done so much for me already," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "I can't imagine how I could ever repay you." "You don't have to," Emma replied, her tone gentle but firm. "Kindness doesn't need repayment. It's just how the world should be." The elderly man stared at her, his eyes glistening once more. For the first time in a long while, he felt the true spirit of Christmas. Not in expensive gifts, not in grand celebrations, but in the quiet generosity of a stranger who had given him something far more valuable. As Emma and the elderly man ate together, the warmth of the meal and the soft glow of the Christmas tree created an atmosphere of quiet comfort. Conversation flowed easily between them, and for the first time in a long while, the man felt like he belonged somewhere. Emma learned that his name was Thomas, and he had once been a carpenter. He spoke fondly of the furniture he had built, of the way his hands used to shape wood with precision and care. But life had been unkind. After losing his wife to illness and his job to age, he had slowly drifted into hardship, eventually losing his home. "I tried to keep going," Thomas admitted, staring at the steam rising from his soup. "But it gets hard when no one sees you anymore. When the world moves on without you." Emma reached across the table, placing her hand gently over his. "I see you," she said softly. "And you matter." Thomas swallowed hard, nodding as he wiped at his eyes. As the evening wore on, they laughed and shared stories, their loneliness melting away in the warmth of companionship. For Emma, Christmas had never felt so full. When it was time for Thomas to leave, Emma handed him a small wrapped package. He looked at her in surprise. "What's this?" he asked. "A gift," she said simply. "Open it when you get home." Thomas hesitated, then carefully tucked it into his coat. "Thank you, Emma," he said. "For everything." She smiled. "Merry Christmas, Thomas." As he stepped outside into the cold, something inside him felt lighter, warmer. When he finally opened the small package later that night, he found a pair of warm woolen gloves and a simple note. "You are not alone. You are loved. Merry Christmas." Tears welled in his eyes. For the first time in years, Thomas fell asleep with a heart full of hope. And in a small apartment across town, Emma did the same, knowing that this was the Christmas she would always remember. Not because of what she had received, but because of what she had given.